First on BBC One Panorama with Sarah Barkley.
A fetus in its mother's womb, the most potent symbol in the moral minefield of abortion. But behind the old images, there's a new debate, and this time it's the doctors who are speaking out.
Most people don't want to think about abortion. Most people would like to bury their head in the sand.
Tonight on Panorama, the dilemmas the doctors have been keeping hidden behind closed doors. An 18-year-old girl crosses the threshold of a hidden world. It's a private clinic and she's come for an abortion. 1 in 3 women will have one. She's 9 weeks pregnant, an accident. She's single and she's already got a 2-year-old daughter.
I wouldn't be able to cope mentally or physically because my daughter does tire me out a lot now. I don't think I could cope with 2 young children running about all day long.
There are 200,000 abortions a year in Britain, more than 500 a day. Alan Rogers will do 30 this morning. He's one of the few doctors prepared to allow us behind the closed doors of his operating theatre. He says he and his patients have nothing to hide.
I think it's wrong to try and make a woman feel guilty about something which she is going to do. I don't think that's profitable at all.
For this girl, abortion is a last resort. The decision's not been easy.
If I could, I'd go through giving the baby up for adoption, but I couldn't do that. Because if I had the baby, that's it. I wouldn't want to let it go. It is then a part of me. I've given birth to it, and I really couldn't let it go.
There's nothing wrong with any of the women on this morning's operating list, and probably nothing wrong with their babies either. They're abortions for social reasons and legal up to the 24th week of pregnancy.
I think if somebody wants to have a baby, they should have one, and I think if somebody doesn't want to have a baby, then they shouldn't have one.
The decision's my decision, no one else's, and it will be made by me and no one else. And I will not be made to feel guilty for my decision.
Like every other woman who walks through these doors, she'll remain conscious right up to the last moment, just in case she wants to change her mind.
I feel nervous, I feel a bit scared, but it'll be okay. It'll be okay. It's something you have to deal with.
I want you to bring your bottom down a bit. Lovely, that's it.
I don't consider it as a fetus or whatever. I do consider it as a person, but then also that person is a responsibility that I can't live up to.
At this early stage in pregnancy, abortion is such a simple procedure, it could be done under local anaesthetic. But the girl, like many others, has chosen to be unconscious during her abortion. Like 90% of all abortions, it's taking place in the first 12 weeks of pregnancy. A tube will be placed in her womb. The fetus is just 3 centimetres long, small enough to be sucked through the tube into a container. The abortion takes just over a minute. The contents of the container will be checked to make sure the pregnancy's been terminated. The girl is then wheeled back to the recovery room to wait for the anaesthetic to wear off.
Okay, everything's absolutely fine. It's all right. It's all right. It's okay.
For the girl, grief and relief are finely balanced. But for this doctor, abortions so early in pregnancy present no ethical dilemmas.
I think we've now decided that it's not a child, certainly not before the 24th week.
Who's decided?
The medical profession, the country, the government, us in general, society in general. We don't kill children. I don't kill children.
What do you kill?
I terminate pregnancies.
You don't see it as a child?
Absolutely not.
Do you see it as a potential life?
Of course, of course, of course. But so are all my sperm, so are all your eggs. Potential lives.
Half an hour later, Dr. Rogers formally discharges his patient.
How are you?
I'm okay.
Good. Everything was fine, the operation was no problem. All right, you're going home later?
Yeah.
Do you have any questions at all you want to ask me? You sure?
Only her boyfriend will know where she's been. Abortion is a secret many women like to keep. It's one of the few operations which require legal notification. Dr. Rogers has to complete a form like this every time he does an abortion. He's been doing them for 25 years and is proud of providing a service he believes women need.
Given that it is going to happen, and it has happened throughout the centuries, it's happened ever since time began, as far as I know, then let's do it properly. So that's one of the main reasons that I do it, is that I mean, I've seen the effects of it being done illegally, which are horrifying, horrifying.
Did I get the doctor?
No, they might try and save the baby, and I don't want no kids on that gate.
In the early 1960s, when abortion for social reasons was largely illegal, a powerful television drama, Up the Junction, brought the reality of backstreet abortion into the nation's living rooms.
Oh, be better.
But women with money could afford to pay a private doctor and a psychiatrist to say they were mentally disturbed, one of the few grounds for legal abortion in those days. That was the way out for Diane Monday when she discovered she was pregnant with a fourth baby. A friend who'd had no money died after a backstreet abortion. It was something she never forgot.
I was alive. She was dead, leaving a young man without a wife and 3 young children without a mother. And I vowed then that if necessary I would spend the rest of my life fighting for what I considered to be then, and still do consider to be, the privilege of a woman being able to decide that she could end an intolerable pregnancy.
She became a campaigner for legal abortion, and the prize she and others had fought so hard for was finally won. In 1967, the Abortion Act was passed. It became legal, but only under certain conditions. Abortions could be performed up to 28 weeks of pregnancy because this was the accepted point of viability. In other words, the point at which a baby could survive if born prematurely. Firstly, the Act allowed abortion if 2 doctors agreed there was a substantial risk that the baby would be born seriously handicapped. Secondly, the Act allowed abortion if the 2 doctors accepted that continuing the pregnancy would involve more risk to the woman's physical or mental health than ending it, the so-called social clause. But the critical decisions had been left to doctors. A moral problem had been dressed up as a medical one. Social abortion had been brought in through the back door.
There's no doubt that in the parliamentary debates and among those who drafted the Act, that was the intention. But there's equally no doubt that many MPs who voted for it felt that they were giving doctors approval for providing the abortions that doctors considered necessary, and many people had the view that this would be a very small number of abortions.
In fact, the numbers soared, from 54,000 in 1969 to 169,000 just 4 years later. The anti-abortionists looked on in horror. In 1990, the abortion limit was reduced to 24 weeks as medical advances lowered the level of viability. On the other side, campaigners for women's rights were equally determined. They wanted abortion on request and were unhappy that doctors still had power over what they believed should be a woman's right to choose. During the 1990s, frustrated by their failure to outlaw abortion, anti-abortion campaigners turned their attention to the clinics and the doctors who worked there. The ones they held responsible for what they claimed was the wholesale murder of unborn children. The central problem, the fact that the Abortion Act gave doctors the power to accept or reject a woman's request for an abortion, remains unresolved. Now, 30 years on, doctors are beginning to ask whether they should go on taking moral responsibility for the life or death of a fetus. For a woman, the legacy of the Abortion Act is an abortion lottery, dependent not only on where she lives, but on whether her doctor personally believes abortion is right or wrong. In a provincial town in England, a casualty of that abortion lottery, a young girl increasingly desperate to get an abortion. But in her town, abortion is taboo. That's why she hides her face and why we cannot use her real name.
I'm not ready to be a mother. I'm too young. I've got my whole life ahead of me. I'm only 17, and to give it up for a baby is just not what I want to do with my life.
Sally and her fiancé were using contraception, but it failed. She went to her GP when she was 7.5 weeks pregnant to ask for an abortion. At that stage, she could have taken the abortion pill, but he believed abortion was morally wrong.
He called me an 8-week-old baby killer. He threw me away like a piece of dirt. We gave him our reasons, and he said they weren't good enough reasons. He took a book and said that he could give me 2 numbers, and he blew on the book as if he was blowing dust off it, as if no one had ever seen it before. He was doing it to make me feel as though no one had abortions nowadays, and many people kept their babies, and that I was the first person in years that had gone in there and asked if I could have an abortion or get some help.
It was another month before she got an appointment at her local hospital. By then, she was 12.5 weeks pregnant. When she got there was another shock in store. The hospital said they, like many other NHS hospitals, didn't do abortions over 12 weeks, and she was just over the limit. She was back to square one. Sally's only hope now is a private clinic where they can do abortions over 12 weeks, but she hopes the NHS will pay the bill. She's now 14 weeks pregnant and getting increasingly frustrated by all the delays. What's more, she and her boyfriend have to go through yet another counselling session, their 4th since all this began.
I just feel as though I've had so much counselling and it's just getting harder now.
Yes,
because
it feels like you've had that many obstacles.
We made the decision at 7 or 8 weeks, and if someone would have made us aware that we could have taken a pill at that time, we would have done it. But unfortunately, we weren't made aware of the facts. Right. I mean, it's not against you, it's against our GP.
Sally's finally been given a date for the abortion, but there's still another week to wait. By then, she'll be almost 15 weeks pregnant. What should have been a simple early abortion will now be a late one. A private abortion clinic, one of the largest in England. Sally is one of almost 20,000 women having abortions between the 3rd and 5th months of pregnancy. As each week passes, she's become more aware of being pregnant.
All right. Good luck.
You think of this child and this little thing growing inside you, and you're going to be getting rid of it. And it's just really hard.
That's it, yeah. And then I'll come back.
Maybe it's growing, it's getting all its features, but it's not a human being yet.
You say you think of it as a baby, as a child. Whose rights do you think are more important, your rights or its rights?
Well, I think that my rights are more important, really.
Why?
Because I have to look after the child. I have to dedicate my life to the child. I have to stop doing things that I would be normally doing. Equally, it's got rights of its own, but it doesn't know its rights yet. It would know its rights when it was born, but it doesn't know yet. It doesn't know what I'm doing. It doesn't have any feelings. It's just growing. That's all.
Now she's 15 weeks pregnant, Sally's abortion will be more difficult for the doctors and more dangerous for her. At this point in pregnancy, a fetus is fully formed and around 12 centimetres long. too big to be sucked down a tube. King's College Hospital in London is one of a dwindling number of NHS hospitals willing to provide late abortions. Dr. John Parsons runs the service. He's frustrated by doctors who block the way to early abortion.
Is that this morning's list?
Yes, we've got 10 cases, several early ones, 14 weeks, 13 weeks, 16 weeks and 20 weeks.
What counts as early for you?
Before 13, 12 weeks, that sort of gestation.
And after that they're all classified as late?
Yes, that's right.
Several of the women on Dr. Parsons' list have been waiting for their abortions since before Christmas. He'd prefer most abortions to happen under 12 weeks, but delays and waiting lists are turning what should be early abortions into late ones.
I find it extremely upsetting. I think if the health service has got any responsibility towards us, is at least to allow us to do these procedures early and not late. It's obviously unpleasant for the woman, but it's quite unnecessarily unpleasant for us.
John Parsons has been doing late abortions for many years. They're the ones he dreads most. Now he believes it's time he spoke openly about what they involve, that by making public the private anguish they cause him, he might encourage changes in the system to help women have abortions earlier.
I would like to see everything brought out into the open, because at the end of the day, truth-telling usually is advantageous.
Who's been cancelled?
Dr. Parsons does about 200 late abortions a year.
You open the neck of the womb as many millimetres as the patient is weeks pregnant. So if she's 10 weeks pregnant, you open it 10 millimetres. If she's 15 weeks pregnant, you open it 15 millimetres. It just, fortunately, it's nice and easy to remember, means that you can extract the fetus through that size of cervix at that gestation.
Or when you've opened the cervix, how do you remove the fetus?
We use some forceps.
Bit by bit?
Bit by bit, yeah.
How do you feel about doing that?
Well, it's an unpleasant task because you see pieces of the fetal anatomy which are easy to recognise and therefore bring home to you what you're doing. As the gestation advances, the fetus becomes bigger and clearly is becoming more like a baby. They're less easy to remove from the womb, not just because of the size, but because they are more solid, so more force is needed to do it. But I always remember that what I'm doing is for the good of the woman, and that it is therefore justified, and therefore I'm willing to do it, even though I find it unpleasant.
To those people who believe that abortion is wrong, what you say and what you're willing to do will seem horrific. Is there any strength in the arguments that they have? Are they important? Are they valid?
I understand their arguments. I understand they're anxious about killing defenceless fetuses. I understand that completely. That's something that you have to if you're performing abortions.
Is that what you think you're doing? Killing defenceless fetuses?
Absolutely. But I regard the social situation of the woman as taking precedence over this potential life that we're destroying.
Is that the case?
Overriding from my point of view.
Is that the case at all gestations, or is there a point, do you think, at which the rights, whatever they are, of the unborn child take precedence over those of the woman?
I certainly think that up to the legal limit that we're allowed to perform terminations, then the woman's rights are paramount. But as you get nearer those upper limits, it certainly becomes more difficult, I feel, to perform the procedures, because you do realise that the fetus could perhaps be viable if it was born alive.
Medical advances mean doctors can now keep alive babies born more than 4 months premature, when abortion is still legal. It's here on the edges of life that some doctors feel the abortion debate enters new territory. It's Sunday afternoon, and a woman 6 months pregnant has just checked into a private abortion clinic and handed over £645. She already has a child and wanted to keep this one. But the father's a drug dealer and addict who first encouraged her to have the baby, then changed his mind.
I was shocked when I first found out I was pregnant. I didn't want another baby. But when I told my boyfriend, he seemed pleased, and I thought it'd be nice to have a brother or sister for my daughter. But when I was 4 months pregnant, he said it wasn't the right time for a baby. I didn't know what to do. I asked the hospital for an abortion, but they said I was too late. Now it's so big I can feel it moving. It's hard, but I'm scared to go ahead with another baby on my own.
She's one of almost 650 women a year who have abortions at this very late stage in pregnancy. To prevent the possibility of the fetus being born alive, the abortion will take place in 2 stages. Under general anaesthetic, the doctor will first cut the umbilical cord, killing the fetus. Half an hour later, the first part of the abortion is over. The fetus is dead. Tomorrow, it will be surgically removed. Some doctors find it hard to justify social abortions this late, but this woman believed she had no choice. This baby is just a few weeks older than the fetus which was removed in the clinic.
The line that was doing for the feeding had to be taken out.
Dr. John Wyatt runs the special care baby unit at a large London hospital. He spends his life struggling to save premature babies and believes it's time he and his colleagues ask questions about what's going on at the edges of viability.
It's now possible with intensive care to give a very good chance of life to babies who are as small as 24 or even 23 weeks of gestation. But at the same time, because abortion is legal up to 24 weeks and in some cases beyond, you have this rather bizarre situation that you can have one group of doctors who are concentrating on trying to save the life of a very small baby, and at the same time, even in the same hospital, abortions are being performed at the same gestational age.
The baby will be in hospital for months and will be given everything that modern medicine can offer to try and save it. Its legal right to life was undisputed from the moment it was born, yet the fetus surgically removed 3 weeks earlier had no rights at all.
The issue of how we value the life of the unborn child and also of the newborn baby are issues which we can't avoid as a society. They're issues which are deeply divisive, and yet they're issues that we can't sweep under the carpet. We need, as a society, to look at the face of these issues, which of course have been there for thousands of years. What is different is that technology has sharpened the focus. It's made these issues much more urgent. And
Science itself has changed the debate.
The science has focused the debate.
Science is also focusing the debate on one of the most controversial issues of all, the question of what, if anything, the fetus is capable of feeling and when. Until recently, it was a question few scientists were asking.
This is a fetus of 12 weeks. At this stage it moves and it'll wriggle away if it's touched, but we don't think it actually feels anything. We don't think it's conscious.
Dr. Vivec Glover is a member of the only research team in the world investigating when a fetus feels stress. Research which, though not directly connected to abortion, has raised questions about whether abortion might cause pain.
The first time at which it might start to be conscious is about 14 to 16 weeks. About 20 weeks, we know that it has stress responses.
Stress isn't pain, is it?
No. Stress is not pain. We measure stress because we can. We're not able to measure pain in the fetus. But stress may be associated with extreme distress, and from the stage at which we think a fetus may just start to be conscious, it may be associated with suffering.
If an abortion is going to be performed, the fetus was never intended to be born, so why argue about whether it feels stress or pain or distress?
Well, I think that with animals we're very concerned that they're killed in a humane fashion, and I think the same should be done with the fetus. It may not have the same experience as an adult, I'm sure it doesn't, but I think we can still be concerned that it's treated in as humane a way as possible, and if it's going to be killed, that it's killed with as little suffering as possible.
Research like this sharpens the debate about whether the fetus has any rights, and if so, at what stage it acquires them. Advances in technology allow doctors to save the lives of younger and younger premature babies. But that just makes it more difficult to reconcile the difference between the absolute rights of the newborn and the non-existent rights of a fetus of the same age.
There's no doubt that a fetus, an unborn baby, is alive, but the question of whether that unborn child is a member of society is a much more difficult issue. What I want to put the emphasis on is more our responsibilities. What are the responsibilities of society, and particularly of medical professionals, towards the fetus? And I think I and all my colleagues would believe that we do have responsibilities to a fetus. We can't just treat the fetus as a being of no significance.
Medical science has been marching forward in another area too, and it's opened up the prospect of abortion for an entirely new category of women.
When the Abortion Act was passed, the ability to detect abnormalities in unborn babies was nowhere near the sophisticated science it's become 30 years later. Now, a wide range of abnormalities can be detected, but often not till later in pregnancy. In 1990, the Abortion Act was extended, giving doctors the right to offer women abortions up to birth if a serious abnormality was found. It's an option which is raising ethical dilemmas even more complex than those involved in more straightforward social abortions.
Most difficult of all is the question of what constitutes an abnormality in the first place. Ros Barnes was 22 weeks pregnant when prenatal tests confirmed her baby had Down syndrome. It was something she knew little about. Around 700 babies with Downs are born every year. What she wanted to know was how severely affected her baby might be.
Some people are born with Downs and they can live quite a normal life, but then there's other children that really can't do anything for themselves. There was 3 other children to consider, and what the child would be like, what the quality of life would be like. Life's hard enough, I think, without coming into the world with a disability. And obviously we wouldn't be around forever to look after the baby. And at some stage, I mean, if it was very, very severely handicapped, it would maybe, you know, have to go into a home and be cared for, which I didn't feel as if it was fair to the baby to put the baby through that.
She didn't have long to make up her mind. She was already nearly 6 months pregnant.
You know, I'd seen this baby on the scan, I'd seen the heartbeat and seen it move, I felt it move. And yes, you know, it had the right to live, I think.
And yet you were facing the prospect of having to choose whether it lived or died.
That's right, yeah.
What does it feel like to be faced with that sort of choice?
It's very hard to explain. You feel quite alone, I think. You know, other people are sort of trying to hurry you up and think, well, you know, you must go ahead with the termination, but in the back of your mind you think, no, you know, this is my baby, I want to keep it.
But Ros decided to have an abortion. The doctors thought it would help her grieve if she actually gave birth to the baby she'd wanted. She was in labour for 18 hours. The baby was born dead. She was allowed to hold it. It was a boy. But her experience left her wondering whether the doctors who tried to help her had done the right thing.
Do you wish you'd never had to make the choice? Yeah, I think I do, really. Why? I think if I'd not had the test in the first place, then I wouldn't have had to make the decision. And then if I'd have had a baby with Downs, then we'd have just got on with it and probably accepted it.
That was 2 years ago, but Ros still thinks about her son every day. She believes that on balance she made the right decision, given that no one could tell her how severe the baby's disability would be.
And how do you feel the baby's been doing?
Not moving.
But for the doctors who specialise in detecting abnormalities in unborn babies, Down syndrome is one of the greyest areas of all. Professor Charles Rodek is one of the country's leading experts in the specialty now known as fetal medicine. But even he couldn't have told Ros Barnes what she most wanted to know, how badly affected her baby might be. That leaves doctors like him trying to interpret a law which gives him wide discretion to perform abortions.
Well, the wording of the law is if there is a substantial risk of a serious abnormality. That is a vague wording, and that has caused doctors quite a lot of problems. How do you define what is substantial, and how do we define what is severe? And clearly that will differ from one doctor to the next, and it will also differ from one couple to the next. There obviously are some broad areas of consensus where most people don't step way out of line, but it's still an ill-defined area.
The latest figures show that 2,000 abortions a year are performed for fetal abnormality, and the numbers are rising. For the doctors who do these abortions, the question is what more, if anything, the law can do to help them make these judgments.
People have talked about a list of abnormalities for which termination was ethical or right, and a list where it wasn't. Lists like that are completely senseless because most of these, almost all conditions, diseases, abnormalities are variable to a certain degree.
Doesn't that leave open the possibility, though, that you might end up performing abortions for much less serious abnormalities as time goes on?
You're asking, is this a slippery slope? I don't believe the slippery slope argument in most cases.
But some doctors in fetal medicine units say the lack of certainty in this area is making impossible demands on them. I spoke to one who feels under increasing pressure to perform abortions for what he considers to be trivial reasons. He asked not to be identified.
What sort of abnormalities are you talking about?
Limb abnormalities, a missing hand, forearm, those sort of abnormalities.
You've been asked to perform an abortion for that reason?
Yes, late on in pregnancy, sort of 18, 19 weeks. And I remember at the time feeling sort of quite horrified by that.
Did you do it?
I did agree to do it.
What was the justification?
Well, the justification for that parent was that they did not want to have a child born with no right arm.
But it's not a serious abnormality, is it? By any stretch of the imagination.
It's not a serious abnormality. The problem is, the more you look for on the scan, the more we can find subtle abnormalities. And the result of that is likely to be that people are going to request terminations for more and more mild reasons.
But it's abortions in the last 3 months of pregnancy which cause most difficulty. There are just 80 a year, and most are for abnormalities so severe the babies would have little chance of survival. But it's these which cause doctors greatest anguish. For them, doing abortions at this late stage in pregnancy leaves them facing the ultimate moral test of their professional careers. To prevent a fetus being born alive, at which point they'd be legally obliged to treat it, doctors use ultrasound to locate the fetus's heart before performing a procedure known as feticide.
We give the fetus an injection into the heart, and that causes it to stop beating instantly, so that it's a very rapid, very painless procedure, and the parents know that, and in many cases that gives them a sense of relief.
Do you find it difficult to do?
Yes, yes, oh yes.
For this man, feticide goes against all his instincts as a doctor.
How late in a pregnancy have you performed a feticide?
36 weeks.
36?
36 weeks.
How difficult was it for you to perform a feticide so late in a pregnancy?
Very, very difficult. I don't know how I'd feel pulling the trigger on a gun and watching somebody die. But I suppose in some ways, just watching life disappear on the end of a needle is awful. It is so awful. If you compare that with a social termination, whereby you're aware of what you're doing, but you don't really see what's going on, and you compare that with actually watching a heartbeat and then injecting it and slowly watching it stop, I mean, it's just the most awful procedure you could be asked to do. I do not feel that I should be in a position to be able to take life.
Over the last 30 years, doctors have shouldered the burden of responsibility for the 4 million abortions that have taken place. But there's a growing consensus they no longer want that power. Many doctors feel they should have no say in abortions under 12 weeks, and that the only way to deal with the moral minefield of late abortion is to involve us all in a discussion of issues which up to now have been taboo.
It's important that society understands what is happening, and this debate is too important to be left to doctors. It's something that society as a whole must address.
Most people don't want to think about abortion. Most people would like to bury their head in the sand and agree that women have the right to choose, but not actually face the moral dilemmas which we have to face when we're agreeing to abortion being performed.
Is it time we shared the doctors' dilemmas and took part in the debate about abortion? If we don't, we must accept that the harsh decisions will go on being made behind closed doors.